Durban climate change talks finished overnight, with real progress being made on global climate change cooperation. Beyond expectations, we've seen an agreement where all major emitters will now be covered by an international treaty by 2015. Always in the past, we've had agreements which only cover legally binding commitments to reduce pollution from developed countries. Now we've broken the logjam. We now have an agreement that India, China, Brazil, South Africa, the other major developing economies will join with the US, Australia and the EU in taking on legally binding commitments to reduce pollution. The other significant outcome of Durban is that we've taken some of the key decisions that were made in Cancun last year and put them into practice. We now have a credible institution in the Global Climate Fund that will help unlock billions of dollars of new investment in clean energy in developing countries and help the world's poorest nations adapt to the accelerating impacts of climate change. Before Durban, the Climate Institute put out 4 scenarios for the outcomes of the meeting. They included a collapse, where discussions around the legal nature of the future regime that we're negotiating can't be resolved and the meeting collapses. The second scenario was that we saw modest progress on operationalising the Cancun agreements, and that would have seen a patchwork arrangement around the world where domestic actions were increasingly coordinated at bilateral and a unilateral level and not coordinated at a global level. The progress scenario that we put forward saw the Cancun agreements implemented in a solid way, where you increased global cooperation through a UN framework to develop new carbon markets, drive clean energy investment in developing countries and build the institutions that are needed around transparency and the review of the commitments that countries are making to increase the ambition of the efforts that countries currently have underway. The fourth scenario was the breakthrough scenario, where we actually did get a pathway to develop a legally binding treaty by 2015, and that treaty would cover all major emitters, and that would happen alongside the Cancun agreements. The way the Climate Institute is describing the outcomes of Durban is somewhere between the good progress and the breakthrough scenarios. The timeline for new legally binding commitments is not what we'd like, it's 2020. But that does not mean that countries won't act in advance. And indeed, if you're a nation which is looking down the barrel of a legally binding commitment in 2020, you want to make sure that you've got in place the domestic policies you need to meet any of those new commitments. So that brings me back to the domestic level in Australia. At the moment we have the Clean Energy Future Package, which does have an opportunity to deliver on the targets that Australia's committed to internationally. The passage and a legally binding agreement which covers all major emitters will really put pressure on the coalition to ensure that it puts in place a credible policy that can actually achieve the 5 to 25% target range that we've put on the table, because their current policy can't achieve that. It will also put pressure on the Gillard government, because as we look around the world at the actions that countries are taking and the commitments that Australia has made, the current minimum 5% target is not sufficient. And we do have an agreement in Durban for countries to increase their level of ambition, because everyone recognises that while countries around the world are taking some very significant steps to drive clean energy investment, drive or limit pollution, it's not sufficient at the moment to avoid dangerous climate change. So we've got a couple of hard years ahead in terms of negotiations to the new legally binding treaty in 2015. But critically, we are seeing domestic action around the world accelerating. Indeed, we saw the trillionth dollar of investment in clean energy while the Durban meeting was happening. And the challenge now for all governments, including the Australian government, is to increase its ambition, put in place credible targets that would allow us to play our fair share in an effort to avoid dangerous climate change.